The night I skipped my dad's retirement party, I was on the couch eating cold pizza, half watching a reality show about people flipping haunted houses. It was one of those decisions you don't really think through, because deep down you assume it won't matter. I mean, how could it? My dad's not exactly Mr. Sentimental in retirement. That's just quitting your job with extra paperwork. It didn't feel like a monumental event. At least, not to me. The invitation had come weeks earlier, tucked inside a manila envelope with my dad's scrawled handwriting. Official notice of my escape from corporate bondage. Classic dad humor. Inside was a flyer with a photo of him grinning next to a golf cart. "Join us to celebrate Ed's retirement," it read. Maroon and gold, the colors of his alma mater, because of course it was. I read it, smiled, and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a tomato. The date stared at me every time I reached for a beer or leftovers, a quiet reminder I was supposed to be somewhere. But as the day got closer, I started to rationalize. It's just another one of Dad's gags, I told myself. He probably threw this party because Mom made him. I'll just call him after. He won't even notice I'm not there. It wasn't just laziness, though. If I'm being honest, I avoided the party because of the speeches. I could already picture it. People standing in circles trading stories about Dad's legacy as the guy who made jokes in board meetings. Mom would cry during her toast, and Dad would give one of his long-winded Edisms that only he found funny. And me? I'd be the dutiful son clapping in the corner, feeling like an extra in someone else's movie. No thanks. So, I stayed home, and it was fine, quiet, uneventful. Around 10:30, I texted him, "Congrats, Dad. Hope the party was fun. You deserve it." He didn't respond, which didn't surprise me. He's not big on texting. I went to bed thinking I'd dodged a boring night, and that he'd get over it. Except he didn't. When we met for lunch a few weeks later, I knew something was off the second I saw him. Dad's the kind of guy who's always in motion, like he's afraid if he sits still too long the universe might forget about him. But that day, he was slouched in the booth, stirring his coffee absently. We made small talk, weather, sports, some joke about how his golf swing was already retirement-level lazy. But then, out of nowhere, he put his spoon down and said, "So, you were too busy for the party?" My stomach dropped. "Oh, no, not busy, just I didn't think it was that big of a deal." He nodded, lips pressed into a thin line, and stared out the window for what felt like forever. "Not a big deal," he repeated quietly, like he was testing the words. Then he looked back at me, and I noticed his hands were shaking. It was a big deal to me. That's when it hit me. My dad, the guy who could crack a joke in the middle of a car crash, was actually hurt. Not annoyed, not teasing me to make a point, hurt. The realization came so fast and sharp it felt like someone had flipped my brain upside down. "Dad, I started, but he waved me off. I know you're busy," he said, his voice too even. "And I'm not mad. I just thought, I don't know. I thought you want to be there." The words cut deeper than any guilt trip he could have laid on me. There was no anger in them, no lecture about family values or respect. Just disappointment, plain and raw. I tried to explain myself, to string together excuses about how I'd thought the party was just a formality, how I didn't realize it mattered to him. But everything I said sounded hollow. My dad, who never asked for anything from anyone, had asked for one night, and I'd shrug it off like a chore. He changed the subject after that, and we finished lunch as if nothing had happened. But the conversation hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. On the drive home, I kept thinking about all the times Dad had shown up for me. He'd driven 3 hours to watch me fumble through a community theater play in college. He'd sat in the freezing rain at my high school soccer games, yelling, "That's my boy," every time I touched the ball. And here I was, skipping the one event that marked the end of his 40-year career because I didn't want to sit through a speech. I texted my mom that night, asking how the party had gone. She sent back a photo of Dad holding a plaque his co-workers had given him. The look on his face, it wasn't his usual goofy grin. He looked proud, sure, but there was something else, something quieter. He'd spent his entire adult life working for this moment, and I hadn't been there to see it. It's been weeks now, and I still haven't figured out how to fix it. I keep replaying the way he said, "It was a big deal to me," like it was the simplest thing in the world. Because it was. He didn't need a gift or a grand gesture. He just needed me to show up. Was I selfish? Oblivious? Or is it unreasonable to expect someone to drop everything for a party? I don't know, but the look in his eyes that day keeps haunting me. AITA? It was my idea to take a cooking class together. Luke had been subtly hinting that we needed a new couples thing, ever since our weekly trivia nights had gone down in flames after a particularly contentious argument about the capital of Paraguay. It's Asunción for the record, and I was right. Cooking seemed safe, creative, a shared goal where we could eat the results. No right or wrong answers. Or so I thought. The class was called A Night in Tuscany, held in a cozy culinary studio with brick walls and shelves lined with dusty jars of spices. It smelled faintly of rosemary and fresh bread, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine us kneading dough together or laughing over a glass of wine while sautéing something fragrant. But as soon as we sat down, the instructor, Antonella, swept into the room like a tempest, brandishing a basket of fresh vegetables. Cooking, she declared in a thick Italian accent, is not about perfection. It is about love, passion, instinct. Luke leaned toward me, smirking. Sounds like my kind of class. I shot him a look. Luke's cooking instinct generally involved dumping random things into a pan and declaring it fusion. I, on the other hand, believed in the sanctity of recipes. Cooking was a science, precise, measurable, predictable. Let's just follow along, I whispered. No freestyling. He raised his hands in mock surrender. Scout's honor. The first dish was ribollita, a hearty Tuscan soup made with cannellini beans, vegetables, and stale bread. Antonella demonstrated how to chop each ingredient, emphasizing the importance of respecting the vegetable. I carefully diced the carrots and celery into uniform pieces, lining them up like soldiers on my cutting board. Luke, meanwhile, hacked away like he was auditioning for a lumberjack competition. "They're going in the pot," he said when I glared at his uneven chunks. "No one's grading us." Antonella might be, I muttered under my breath, glancing nervously at our instructor, who was busy swirling olive oil in her pot with the grace of a conductor leading an orchestra. The soup simmered as we moved on to making fresh pappardelle, a process Antonella described as intimate. She demonstrated how to knead the dough with firm, rhythmic motions, and I followed her lead, pressing my palms into the floury mass with what I thought was a respectable level of intimacy. Luke, on the other hand, had rolled his dough into something resembling a crumpled map of the United States. "It's sticking," he complained, holding up a mangled piece. "You didn't flour your surface," I pointed out. "It's not that hard." He shot me a look and aggressively floured the counter. So aggressively, in fact, that a plume of white dust erupted into the air. The couple next to us coughed politely. When it came time to cut the pasta, I used the provided ruler to measure each strip, ensuring they were exactly half an inch wide. Luke grabbed the knife and started slicing at random. "Luke," I hissed. "They're supposed to be uniform." He held up a strip of dough that was roughly the width of a shoelace. "Who cares? It's going to taste the same." "It's about the experience," I snapped. "The art. The art of eating," he countered, twirling a strip of dough in the air like a lasso. By the time we moved on to dessert, a traditional olive oil cake, the tension between us was palpable. The recipe called for folding whipped egg whites into the batter to make it light and airy. I carefully incorporated mine, folding gently to preserve the fluffiness. Luke dumped his in all at once and started stirring like he was mixing concrete. "You're going to deflate it," I said through gritted teeth. "Relax," he replied. "It's cake, not a bomb." I glanced at Antonella, half expecting her to swoop in and confiscate his bowl, but she seemed unbothered, happily humming to herself as she grated lemon zest. When we finally sat down to eat, the ribollita was delicious, despite Luke's reckless chopping. The pappardelle, however, was another story. My neatly measured pasta cooked evenly and absorbed the sauce beautifully. Luke's resembled a pile of mismatched rubber bands, some of which were undercooked and others nearly falling apart. "Al dente," he said proudly, spearing a particularly thick piece. "More like al dentist," I muttered. The olive oil cake was the final blow. Mine was golden, light, and fragrant. Luke's was dense and slightly lopsided, but he didn't seem to care. "Tastes great," he said, shoving a forkful into his mouth. Not everything has to be perfect, you know. On the way home, the night air cool against my flushed cheeks, Luke broke the silence. "You're mad," he said. "I'm not mad," I replied, which was technically true. I wasn't mad. I was frustrated. I had envisioned this night as a seamless collaboration, a testament to our ability to work as a team. Instead, it had felt like a tug-of-war between chaos and order. "You know," he continued, "you didn't have to treat it like a test. And you didn't have to treat it like an episode of Nailed It." I shot back. He laughed, which annoyed me because I didn't want him to find this funny. "Maybe next time," he said, "we should take a class on compromise." Now, lying here replaying the night in my head, I'm torn. Was I too rigid, unwilling to bend even for the sake of fun? Or was Luke too careless, treating something meaningful like a joke? We both wanted to connect, but somehow we ended up at odds. So, I have to ask, AITA? The morning was one of those bitter, frost-tipped affairs that felt like it had crept out of a storybook about endurance. I could see my breath fogging up the inside of the car as the heater fought valiantly against the November chill. The highway stretched out before me, endless and monotonous, a gray snake coiling through the city. It was the kind of commute where every car felt like a deliberate obstacle, like the universe had conspired to place every slowpoke in my way. I wasn't late. Not yet, but I was close enough that every lane change felt like a critical move in some vast game of chess. The kind where you win not by strategy, but by pure, unrelenting aggression. That's how I ended up in the middle lane, keeping pace with the car on my right as I waited for my opening to merge. The lane was slowing down. An ancient minivan ahead had that lethargic drift of someone who hadn't decided if they were really going to work today, and I needed to get over. The car in the right lane lagged just slightly, and I saw my chance. Signal on. Quick glance to the mirror. Foot hovering over the gas. I started to move, already half committed to the merge when the car beside me shot forward. It wasn't a graceful acceleration, either. It was one of those jerky, ill-timed lunges that screamed, "Not today, buddy." My jaw tightened. My head turned almost involuntarily, my brain already gearing up for a mental catalog of grievances against this anonymous driver. And then I saw her, my wife. Her grin was impossibly wide, her eyes twinkling behind the familiar curve of her glasses. She was waving like she was trying to flag down a long-lost friend across the street, a hand raised in exuberance that felt entirely out of place on this frostbitten stretch of highway. For a moment, I forgot I was driving. The sheer absurdity of it froze me. Then reality returned, sharp and sudden. The missed exit loomed ahead, the lane next to me an impassable wall of tailgates and bumpers. My wife's happy face dissolved into the background as I tightened my grip on the wheel and focused on not missing my turn. A gap opened just ahead. I swung into it, mentally filing the incident away for later. At work, my phone buzzed against my desk. "Sad you didn't wave back." Pensive face, her message was a quiet reproach, so unassuming it almost made me laugh. I left it unanswered, deciding to save the explanation for when we were face to face. Surely she'd understand. But when I walked into the kitchen that evening, the expression on her face told me she hadn't let it go. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed in that particular way that meant she was planning her argument. Her eyebrows arched just slightly, a signal that she wanted me to start. "You're upset about the wave thing, huh?" I asked, setting my keys down on the counter. She didn't respond at first, just stared at me in that way she had, like she was dissecting my entire day through sheer force of will. "It was cute," she said finally. "I thought it was cute." "It was cute," I admitted, "but it was also dangerous." Her arms tightened over her chest. "Oh, come on. I didn't mean to block you. I just saw you and got excited. Excited enough to almost cause a wreck," I said, regretting the words as soon as they left my mouth. Her expression darkened. "I wasn't reckless," she shot back. "I was just trying to have a moment with you. God forbid you smile or wave back." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I wasn't mad at you. I was mad at the situation. Do you know how many terrible drivers I deal with every morning? I thought you were just another one of them until I realized it was you." She frowned, her fingers tapping lightly against the counter. And when you did realize, you couldn't even wave. You just looked at me like I was a stranger. I was startled, I said, and I was focused on not missing my exit. It wasn't personal. It felt personal, she said quietly, like I was invisible, like you didn't care. Her words sank into the space between us, heavy and unanswerable. I hadn't thought about it from her perspective, how it must have felt to be ignored in a moment where she was reaching out, however clumsily. I took a step closer, my hands resting on the counter beside hers. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to make you feel like that. I was just caught off guard. But you're right. I should have waved. Or smiled. Something." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening, but still skeptical. "I wasn't trying to annoy you. I just thought it'd be fun. Like, how often do we randomly see each other on the road?" "It was fun," I said, my voice warming with sincerity. After I realized it was you, I even smiled a little. "You just didn't see it." She rolled her eyes but couldn't keep the small smile from breaking through. "Next time, just wave, even if it's the smallest wave in history." "Deal," I said, laughing. "But only if you promise not to cut me off again." She raised a hand, mock solemn. "I solemnly swear." And just like that, the tension dissolved, leaving only the quiet hum of the fridge and the soft creak of the floor beneath us. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I caught myself smiling at the memory of her goofy wave. It was a small thing, a fleeting moment of chaos on a dull stretch of highway. But in the end, it was one of those moments that made the rest of life's noise feel a little quiet. It started with the pie, a cherry pie, to be specific. My dad had a thing for them, said they were the perfect dessert. He loved the tangy sweetness, the flaky crust, and most importantly, the ritual of baking them himself. He wasn't much of a cook otherwise. In fact, the kitchen was more my mom's domain, but every few months, Dad would dust off his battered recipe book and make his famous cherry pie. It was his pride and joy. That's why, when his arthritis started acting up and he couldn't roll out the crust anymore, I decided to step in. He hadn't mentioned it outright, but I could tell it was bothering him, the way he stared at his hands like they betrayed him. I figured if I could help him make the pie, or even better, surprise him with one, it'd cheer him up. It seemed simple enough. Follow the recipe, channel some care, and voila. How hard could it be? I spent the afternoon perfecting it. I followed his handwritten notes to the letter. Even the weird quirks like chilling the butter for exactly 17 minutes or stirring the cherries with a wooden spoon to keep the flavor honest. The kitchen smelled incredible, the kind of smell that wraps around you and makes everything feel okay for a while. By the time I pulled the pie out of the oven, golden and bubbling at the edges, I felt almost proud. It wasn't just a pie, it was a gift. When I brought it over to his house, he was sitting in his recliner, flipping through the same crossword book he'd been working on for months. "Hey, Dad," I said, holding up the pie like a trophy. "Look what I made." He adjusted his glasses and squinted at it. "That's the pie," he said slowly. "Not just a pie. It's your pie. Cherry just like you like it. I thought, since your hands have been bothering you, I'd take a shot at it for you." His expression froze for a moment, like the words hadn't quite landed. Then he leaned forward, setting the crossword aside. "You made this?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Used your recipe and everything. Want to try it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked over to the counter, and stared at the pie like it was something he didn't quite recognize. Finally, he said, "You didn't need to do this." "It's no big deal," I said, brushing it off. "I thought it'd make you happy." He turned to me, his jaw tightening. "So what? Now I can't even make my own damn pie." I blinked. "What? No, that's not what I meant. You think because my hands hurt, I'm useless now? That I can't handle one simple thing for myself?" "Dad, come on," I said, my stomach twisting. "I wasn't trying to." "You don't get it," he snapped, his voice sharper than I'd heard in years. "That pie isn't just a recipe. It's mine. My thing. And now you've taken that away from me, too." I stood there, holding the pie dish like it was radioactive. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I thought he'd be touched, maybe even proud that I'd gone to so much effort. Instead, I'd somehow turned a gesture of kindness into an act of betrayal. "I didn't mean to take anything away," I said, my voice quieter now. "I just wanted to help." He sighed. running a hand through his thinning hair. "I know you meant well," he said, softer now but still with an edge. "But sometimes meaning well isn't enough. You have to let people hold on to the things that matter to them." I didn't know what to say. The pie was still sitting on the counter, cooling and untouched, its smell filling the room like a reminder of my mistake. Finally, I just said, "I'm sorry," and left. The next day, I came over to check on him. He didn't mention the pie, and neither did I. But when I glanced at the trash can, I saw the empty dish buried under a few crumpled napkins. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel. Did he eat it out of guilt? Out of love? Or was it just easier than letting it go to waste? I couldn't bring myself to ask. But what stuck with me was what he'd said, that I'd taken something from him, something that mattered. I hadn't thought of it like that. To me, it had been a pie, a gesture of kindness. To him, it had been a piece of himself, something that proved he could still do the things he loved, even when life was making it harder. I've been replaying it in my head ever since, wondering if I crossed a line. I thought I was helping, but maybe I just made him feel smaller. Does that make me selfish? Was it wrong to try to lighten his load, even if it meant stepping into something so personal? Or was he being unfair, taking his frustration out on me when I was only trying to care for him? The truth is, I don't know. All I know is that the next time I visit, I'll ask if he wants me to bake the pie with him. Not for him. But for now, I can't stop wondering. AITA? For as long as I can remember, I've been a collector of moments. Not the polished, Instagram-perfect ones, but the odd, crooked seconds where magic feels just close enough to touch. The sound of leaves crunching underfoot in October. The smell of firewood on a crisp evening. The gleam of moonlight on a spider's web. So when my fiancé knelt in the middle of a pumpkin patch 2 years ago and asked me to marry him, it wasn't just a proposal. It was an invitation to build a life out of those moments. And what better way to start than with a wedding that felt like stepping into a living, breathing autumn fairy tale. Our Halloween wedding wasn't about rebellion or spectacle. It was about celebrating the beautiful strangeness that connected us. We chose an old, ivy-covered mansion for the venue. Not grand in a ballroom sort of way, but intimate and brimming with character. Its cracked stone walls and twisting gardens felt alive, like they had secrets to share. My dress would be a swirl of smoky gray and black lace, and he'd wear a deep green suit that reminded me of moss-covered forest floors. It would be a night of jack-o'-lanterns glowing like captured stars, violins playing eerie melodies, and love blooming in shadows. For nearly 2 years, it felt like the dream was ours alone. Sure, there were the occasional side eyes when we mentioned the theme to family, but no one voiced any real objections. I mistook their silence for acceptance. But 6 weeks before the wedding, the silence broke, and the sound of it unraveling was deafening. It started with a single comment from my mom. "You're still doing that theme, right?" she asked, her voice light but brittle. I confirmed, a little confused by the sudden hesitation. "It's just your grandma thinks it's inappropriate." And honestly, I'm starting to agree. It's very dark. Dark. That word began to echo in every family conversation. Dark wasn't just a descriptor, it was an accusation. My grandma called next. "Weddings should be joyful," she said, her tone heavy with disapproval. "Not whatever this is. You'll embarrass the family." By the end of the day, cousins, aunts, even a family friend I hadn't seen in years, all chimed in. They weren't asking questions, they were staging an intervention. I tried to stand my ground, at first with patience, then with frustration, and finally with a kind of grim resolve. "This is our wedding," I told them. "You've known about the theme for 2 years. Why is it suddenly a problem now?" But they couldn't or wouldn't answer. Instead, they kept repeating the same refrain. "It's satanic. It's disrespectful. It's not right." It didn't matter how much I explained that Halloween wasn't about devils or darkness. It was about transformation and beauty in decay. To them, my wedding wasn't a celebration. It was an attack. When they realized they couldn't persuade me, they switched tactics. My mom called again, her voice trembling with manufactured regret. "If you won't change it," she said, "then I don't think I can come. Neither can your grandma." And honestly, a lot of the family feels the same. My heart sank, but then she added the final blow. This isn't how you treat family." That word again. Family. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling, trying to untangle the mess of love and guilt knotted in my chest. Was I being unreasonable? Was I trading my family for fog machines and skeletons? But then I thought about the past, the way they had so often wielded family as a weapon, a leash, a gag. I thought about how many times I had swallowed my joy to make them comfortable. No, not this time. The next morning, I made the call. I went through the guest list with a red pen and drew lines through every name that had declared allegiance to the rebellion. 25 names gone. Then, I sent out new invitations with QR codes. For security reasons, the note said, though it was really a polite way of saying, "Don't bother showing up uninvited." The fallout was volcanic. My aunt left a furious voicemail, accusing me of selfishness. My sister texted me, saying I was overreacting. Even some people who had supported me quietly worried I'd regret the decision. But I felt a strange, calm certainty. I wasn't burning bridges. I was pruning dead branches. When the day of the wedding arrived, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The venue was alive with our vision. Guests wandered through candlelit gardens, marveling at jack-o'-lanterns carved with intricate designs. Inside, the air shimmered with warmth and laughter. My dress felt like a part of me, a billowing dream of lace and tulle. And when I walked down the aisle, the music, a haunting cello piece, seemed to carry me. My fiancé stood waiting, his eyes brighter than the candles. "You look," he began, and then just smiled because words weren't enough. The ceremony was perfect, intimate and surreal, like a spell had been cast over everyone there. The reception was wild, a masquerade ball come to life. Guests wore costumes ranging from elegant to absurd. Someone came as a literal haunted house, complete with lights. My best friend, dressed as a Victorian ghost, made a toast that had everyone crying with laughter. At one point, a group of guests tried to form a conga line to the Addams Family theme, and honestly, it was terrible, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. As the night wore on, I stole a moment for myself, stepping out onto the terrace. The garden below was glowing softly, the pumpkins still flickering, the air thick with autumn. I breathed it in, feeling the weight of the last few weeks slip away. My husband found me there, wrapping his arms around me. "Worth it?" he asked. I looked at him, at the life we were beginning together, and nodded. Every single second. In the end, my wedding wasn't about rebellion or defiance. It was about love for my partner, for the friends who showed up, and for myself. Let them whisper, let them judge. I'd found my magic, and nothing could dim its light. The scissors must have gleamed under the fluorescent classroom lights, but no one stopped her. That's the part one can't get out of my head. An entire classroom, a teacher barely a few feet away, and no one stepped in. Instead, they watched. Some laughed, some whispered, and my daughter sat frozen, trying to protect what little was left of her ponytail, while cruel hands carved pieces of her identity away. It wasn't until she came home, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped, her voice a brittle whisper, that I saw the aftermath. The uneven strands fell limply against her neck, a visible scar of humiliation. She didn't even want to explain. She just went straight to her room, shut the door, and locked it. I knocked, waited, knocked again. Finally, I heard her voice, small and muffled. "It doesn't matter, Daddy. They'll just do it again." Something in me broke. My daughter had always been resilient. When she learned she was adopted, she wore it like a badge of honor. "It means I was chosen," she used to say, her little chin tilted defiantly at anyone who dared to ask if she felt different. But now she was retreating, shrinking, becoming a shadow of the bold, fiery kid I knew. I sat outside her door that night, my back against the wood, and made a decision. If no one else would protect her, then I would. And this time, I wouldn't rely on empty promises from the school. By the next morning, I had already scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. Mark, my husband, wasn't surprised when I told him. If anything, he looked relieved. "It's about time," he said, his jaw tight. "We've been way too patient." The lawyer listened quietly as I laid out everything. The name calling, the relentless taunts about her adoption, and now the physical assault. Cutting her hair without consent isn't just bullying, she said when I finished. It's assault. And if the school failed to act despite your complaints, they're complicit. Hearing her say it so plainly lit a fire in me. It wasn't just about my daughter anymore. It was about every kid who had been silenced, ignored, or told to just tough it out. The first domino fell quickly. The school called within hours of receiving a letter from our lawyer. Suddenly, the principal was available for a meeting. Suddenly, they were reviewing policies and taking immediate action. The bully was moved to another classroom, and the teacher who had stood idly by was placed on leave. But it felt hollow, reactive, not proactive. If we hadn't threatened legal action, would they have done anything at all? I doubted it. Then came the parents of the bully. They wanted to talk. They wanted to smooth things over. Their voices dripped with the kind of performative concern that made my skin crawl. "We're so sorry for what happened," the mother said, clasping her hands together like a soap opera actress. "Our daughter made a mistake, but she didn't mean any harm." "She didn't mean any harm?" I repeated, incredulous. "She held scissors to my child and humiliated her in front of an entire classroom." "What exactly do you call harm then?" Her husband jumped in, his voice defensive. "Kids are kids. They don't always think things through." "Then maybe it's time someone taught yours how," I said, my tone ice cold. "Because my daughter won't be her practice ground." The conversation didn't go much further after that. For weeks, I became a force of nature. I wrote letters to the school board. I documented every interaction with administrators. I filed a formal complaint with the district. And when the story leaked to the local paper, I gave an interview. I didn't name names, but I didn't hold back about the school's negligence either. The backlash was swift. Other parents whispered about us in the pickup line. Some were supportive, but others looked at me like I was stirring up trouble. One mother approached me in the parking lot, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Don't you think you're taking this too far? It's just a haircut." "It's never just a haircut," I said. "It's her dignity. It's her safety. And if it were your child, I hope you'd fight just as hard." The lawsuit eventually settled, and the school implemented stricter anti-bullying protocols. They even hired a counselor to handle reports of harassment more effectively. But it was the small victories that meant the most. The day my daughter walked into her new school without looking over her shoulder, or the moment she joined the art club and came home excited about something for the first time in months. One night, long after the dust had settled, I found her in the kitchen, sketching quietly at the table. Her hair had started to grow back, and she'd tied it up in a tiny ponytail, almost defiantly. She looked up when she noticed me watching. "Did I tell you what happened today?" she asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "A kid was getting picked on during lunch, so I sat with him. The other kid stopped." My chest tightened, a mix of pride and heartbreak. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." She shrugged, but her smile grew. "You taught me. You didn't let anyone push me around. So now I won't let them push anyone else around either." I pulled her into a hug, overwhelmed by the strength she'd found despite everything. "You're incredible. You know that?" She laughed softly. "I had good teachers." And in that moment, I realized that the fight hadn't just been about protecting her. It had been about showing her that she could protect herself and others, that she could rise above the cruelty, not by shrinking, but by standing taller. The argument started with flowers. Angela wanted peonies, but I'd seen them wilt at my sister's wedding and suggested roses instead. Harmless, right? But somehow, that harmless comment opened the floodgates, and soon, we were relitigating every wedding detail we'd already agreed on. The cake, the color scheme, even the way I folded the napkin while pretending to care about table linens. Then out of nowhere, she dropped it. "I was thinking," she said, not looking up from her laptop, "about the guest list. We should probably make it child-free." I was lounging on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram. "Yeah, makes sense," I replied absentmindedly, then added, "Obviously not Max, though." Silence. I looked up. Angela was staring at me, her face as blank as a locked phone screen. "Well," she started, stretching the word like a rubber band about to snap. "I thought it'd be cleaner if we just kept it child-free. No exceptions." At first I laughed, because how could that not be a joke? "You're serious?" She nodded, still not looking at me, which was worse than if she'd met my eyes. I just think it's better this way. Less complicated, less unfair to the other guests with kids. Angela, I said, sitting up, Max isn't some random kid. He's my son. My son. You know that, right? Her jaw tightened. I know that. I'm not saying he's not important, but this is our wedding, not a family reunion. I don't want to spend the day worrying about whether he's bored or if someone has to keep an eye on him. He's 15. He doesn't need a babysitter, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She trailed off, then shook her head, like she was trying to brush away a thought. I wanted to be about us. No distractions, no compromises. Distractions? My voice cracked, betraying the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Angela, do you hear yourself? You're calling my son a distraction. No, that's not what I meant, she said quickly, but the damage was done. We went back and forth for hours, circling the same arguments like a broken carousel. I told her Max was part of me, not some optional guest I could leave off the list. She countered with abstract nonsense about boundaries and clean slates, as if Max was a smudge on the picture of our future. Then she said it, the sentence that would haunt me for weeks afterward. I just don't understand why you need your old family at our wedding when we're starting a new one. Old family. I stared at her, stunned into silence. My old family? I finally repeated, each word dragging like a weight. Come on, she said, exasperated. You know what I mean? This is about us. Not what came before. But I didn't know what she meant. Not at all. The fight ended when she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stayed on the couch, staring at the wedding planning notebook on the coffee table. Its pastel cover mocked me with its cheerful promise of happily ever after. For days, the tension between us was unbearable. Every time I tried to bring it up, Angela deflected or accused me of overreacting. You're being unreasonable, she snapped one morning over breakfast. It's one day, and you're making it into this huge thing. Because it is a huge thing. I shot back. This isn't about the wedding. This is about the fact that you don't seem to understand what Max means to me. If he's not welcome at the wedding, what does that say about how you see him in our life? She rolled her eyes, which somehow hurt more than the words. You're being dramatic. I needed clarity, so I called my best friend, Nate. He didn't mince words. Man, if she's drawing a line between you and your son now, imagine how wide that gap's going to get after the wedding. Are you really ready for that? I wasn't, but I also wasn't ready to give up on the relationship. Angela had always been great with Max, or so I'd thought. She'd gone to his hockey games, cheered him on, even helped him with school projects when I got stuck trying to understand trigonometry. But now I started wondering if all that had been surface level, a performance to win me over. A week later, Angela proposed a compromise. Why don't we move the wedding date, she suggested over dinner. If we wait until Max turns 16, he'll meet the age cutoff, and we won't have to argue about this anymore. That's not a compromise, I said flatly. That's a loophole, and it doesn't fix the problem. She frowned, clearly annoyed. I'm trying to meet you halfway. No, you're trying to make it look like you're compromising while still getting your way. The conversation ended there, and so I realized had something deeper. That night, I made a decision. I loved Angela. I really did, but I love Max more. He was my constant, my foundation. If Angela couldn't understand that, then she wasn't the partner I thought she was. When I told her the next morning, she was furious. You're throwing everything away for a stupid principle, she yelled. It's not a principle, I said quietly. It's my son. In the end, we both walked away angry, hurt, and convinced we were right. But as I sat on the couch that night, Max beside me, eating popcorn and watching one of his favorite comedies, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in weeks. Because love isn't about finding someone who fits into your picture-perfect vision of the future. It's about holding on to the people who make your life worth living. And for me, that's Max. It always will be. The first time I noticed something was wrong with Maisie, she hesitated at the stairs. It was subtle, just a pause, like she was double-checking her balance before climbing up to the bedroom. But Maisie never hesitated at anything. She was the kind of dog who ran headfirst into snowbanks and barked at the vacuum with the confidence of a lion. That little pause should have been my warning, but I brushed it off. A week later, She couldn't make it up at all. She's getting older, my mom said when I called her. Maisie sprawled next to me on the couch, her breathing heavy from the effort of simply existing. Maybe she's just slowing down, but I knew it wasn't just age. Maisie was only 8, and though her golden retriever face had started to gray around the edges, she still had a puppy spirit. Or she had. Now, she winced every time she tried to stand, her back legs trembling like the smallest motion was too much. The vet confirmed what I feared. Degenerative myelopathy, a cruel, irreversible disease that was slowly robbing Maisie of her ability to walk. It's progressive, Dr. Singh said gently. We can manage her discomfort for a while, but eventually, she'll lose the use of her back legs entirely. Is there surgery? Treatment? Anything? My voice cracked on the last word. Dr. Singh hesitated. There's an experimental spinal surgery, she said. Some dogs have shown improvement, but the success rate is unpredictable, and recovery is intensive. How intensive? I asked, bracing myself. You'd need to commit to full-time care, lifting her, helping her with mobility, even expressing her bladder. And there's no guarantee it will work. Her voice softened. Sometimes the kindest choice is to focus on comfort and quality of life. I nodded, blinking back tears, but inside a voice screamed, no, I'm not ready to lose her. That night, I told Ethan everything. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his face unreadable as I talked through the options. Maisie lay in her usual spot by his feet, oblivious to the storm her diagnosis had unleashed. I think we should do the surgery, I said finally. She's still young. She could have years left. Ethan's jaw tightened. And what if it doesn't work? It might, but it might not. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Think about it. She's already struggling. Do you really want to put her through all that just to end up in the same place? I'm not giving up on her, I snapped. This isn't about giving up, he said, his voice rising slightly. It's about what's fair to her. She doesn't understand why she's in pain. And if we put her through this, she won't understand that either. She'll just know she's suffering. She's my dog, Ethan, I said coldly. You don't get it. She's my dog too. His words hit me like a slap. He wasn't wrong. Maisie had been ours since we adopted her together as a goofy, oversized puppy who tripped over her own paws. She was part of us. And now, we were breaking under the weight of what it meant to do right by her. For the next few days, the house felt unbearably quiet. Maisie barely moved, and Ethan and I tiptoed around each other, each of us too stubborn or too scared to bridge the gap. I spent hours researching success stories online, clinging to every glimmer of hope while Ethan retreated into his own corner of doubt. Finally, one night, I found him sitting on the floor beside Maisie, her head resting on his lap. He was stroking her ears, his face soft in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. You know, he said, not looking up, when my dad was dying, he didn't want any more treatments. He said he was tired of fighting. I hated hearing that, but I think I understand now. I sat down beside him, close, but not quite touching. Maisie's not your dad, I said quietly. I know, he said, but she can't tell us what she wants. We have to decide for her. And I don't want to make her go through something awful just because we're scared to say goodbye. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. I can't stand the thought of not trying. He finally looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and full of something I couldn't quite name. And I can't stand the thought of hurting her more than we already have. We sat there in silence for a long time, Maisie's steady, labored breathing the only sound in the room. And then, slowly, we began to talk. Not fight, but really talk about Maisie, about what she wanted she could tell us, about the difference between hope and desperation. In the end, we compromised. We'd try the surgery, but we wouldn't force her through endless interventions if it didn't work. If her quality of life didn't improve, we'd let her go. It wasn't a perfect plan, and it didn't erase my fear or Ethan's doubt, but it felt like the closest thing to right. The surgery was brutal. Watching Maisie afterward, her body weak and unresponsive, was almost more than I could handle. Ethan and I took turns lifting her, feeding her, even carrying her outside in a sling for bathroom breaks. There were moments when I wondered if Ethan had been right, if I'd made the wrong choice, if I'd been selfish. But then, one morning, Maisie wagged her tail. It was small, just a tiny thump against the bed, but it was enough to make me sob with relief. Over the next few weeks, she began to regain some strength. She'd never be the same dog she was before, but she could walk again, slowly and carefully, and her eyes had that familiar spark of mischief. Ethan still worries we made her endure too much. I still wonder if I pushed too hard. But when Maisie waddles over to us, tail wagging, her favorite toy in her mouth, I think maybe we did okay. Maybe love is messy and imperfect, but we found our way through it. AITA? It started with a calendar alert. Dad's 60th. Plan something special. 3 exclamation marks, set by my own overachieving past self. I stared at it for a moment, chewing my pen cap, then picked up the phone and called Julia, my sister. "Hey," I said when she picked up, "we need to talk about Dad's birthday." "Oh no," Julia groaned. "This isn't going to be another one of your big ideas, is it? Remember what happened on Mom's retirement party? The doves? That wasn't my fault. Who knew doves didn't like balloons? Everyone knows that." I ignored her. "Anyway, this is different. It's a 60th. We need to go big. I'm thinking a surprise party." She snorted. "You do remember that Dad hates surprises, right? The man puts a lid on his coffee, so steam doesn't catch him off guard." "Okay, but hear me out. Not just any surprise. Something meaningful. Like, what if we rented out that old bowling alley he used to take us to when we were kids? We could invite his friends from work, his poker buddies, and us, of course. Nostalgia Central. He'd love it." "Love it?" Julia asked. "He hasn't bowled in 20 years. His back would probably give out halfway through the first frame." "Not the point. It's about the gesture. The memories. Don't you think he'd appreciate everyone showing up for him?" Julia sighed, and I could practically hear her shaking her head. "Honestly, I think he'd rather just have dinner with us. Something quiet. His favorite steakhouse. A couple of beers. No spectacle." "But that's so small. This is 60, Julia. You only turned 60 once. We can't just pat him on the back, give him a ribeye, and call it a day." "Why not? He'd be happy with that. You know Dad, he's low-key. He's not the center of attention guy." "Maybe," I said, trying not to sound defensive, "but don't you think he deserves more? I mean, think about everything he's done for us over the years. All the sacrifices. Don't you think he'd enjoy seeing how many people care about him?" Julia was silent for a moment. "Or," she said finally, "you want this to be a big event because you think that's what love looks like. You want it to be memorable for you." That hit harder than I wanted to admit. I paced the kitchen, twisting the phone cord around my finger. "It's not like that," I said, though it felt half true. I want it to be special. Don't you?" "Of course I do. But special doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's better when it's just quietly perfect." We ended up compromising, which in our family meant both of us were equally suspicious of the plan. The day started with a small dinner at Dad's favorite steakhouse. Just me, Julia, and him. He ordered the ribeye, naturally, and Julia gifted him a handmade leather wallet he didn't realize he needed until he saw it. I watched him laugh at her corny jokes, his face soft and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. And then came my part. As he polished off his last sip of beer, I cleared my throat. "Hey, Dad, we've got one more thing planned, if you're up for it." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't protest, which I took as a win. We guided him to the car and drove across town, stopping in front of a familiar building. Old squat, a little shabby around the edges. The bowling alley. His eyebrows shot up when he saw it. "This place is still standing?" he asked, half laughing. "I thought they tore it down years ago." "Not yet," I said, trying to mask my nerves. "Come on." Inside, I'd reserved 3 lanes. No doves, no streamers, no neon signs screaming happy 60th. Just the hum of the ball return machines and the faint smell of stale nachos. A few of Dad's closest friends were waiting, along with his brother and Julia's kids. Not 30 people like I'd originally planned. Just a handful. Enough. "Happy birthday, old man," Uncle Rick said, clapping Dad on the back. "Thought we'd see if you've still got that killer hook shot." Dad looked genuinely startled, his eyes darting from one face to the next. Then he smiled, a real one, wide and toothy, like we'd just handed him the moon. "You guys," he said, shaking his head. This is something. We bowled 3 games. Dad's hook shot was long gone. and halfway through the second round, Julia's youngest managed to roll a ball so softly it stopped halfway down the lane. But no one cared. Between frames, Dad swapped stories with his friends, half of which involved me or Julia doing something dumb as kids. We drank terrible beer out of plastic cups, and when the night wound down, he insisted on paying for nachos for everyone, like we were kids again. After we dropped him off at home, Julia and I stood in the driveway, leaning against her car. "Well?" I asked. "What do you think?" She shrugged, but she was smiling. "I think it was perfect. And I think you're lucky I talked you down from the parade you probably wanted. Lucky Charms themed, actually," I joked. "You were right, though. This was better." Julia didn't gloat, at least not much. "I'll take it." And yet, as I drove home, I couldn't stop wondering. Was it enough? Could it have been better? Or was it perfect because we kept it small? AITA? I arrived at the Abbey just as the bells rang for Vespers, their low, mournful tones rolling across the countryside. The sound stopped me in my tracks, goosebumps prickling my arms. I hadn't expected it to feel sacred. This was supposed to be a beer trip, a darkly funny punchline to a private joke between me and my son. But standing there, dwarfed by stone walls older than the country I'd flown from, I felt a strange pull, like the bells were summoning something buried deep inside me. The monks didn't say much when they handed over the beer, a single case, just like the rules allowed. I half expected them to ask me why I'd come, to demand I justify my presence. But they didn't. They simply nodded, their faces calm and unreadable, as if they'd seen 1,000 men like me. Maybe they had. I loaded the case into my rental car and drove aimlessly, letting the twisting roads carry me somewhere quieter. The countryside blurred past. Rolling green hills, grazing cows, distant windmills. I found a small clearing off the side of the road, the kind of spot you'd miss if you blinked. Parking the car, I grabbed one bottle and his camera, the one he'd always slung around his neck, the strap fraying at the edges. I sat under a sprawling oak tree, its branches heavy with autumn leaves, and opened the bottle. The hiss of escaping air felt too loud in the stillness. I poured the beer into a cheap plastic cup I'd grabbed from a gas station and held it up to the golden light filtering through the branches. "To you, kid," I said, my voice catching. "To every crazy dream you never got to chase." The first sip was unexpected. Sharp, bitter, alive. It wasn't the kind of beer I usually liked, but something about it felt right. I imagined him smirking at me, saying, "Told you you've been drinking garbage all your life, old man." The thought made me laugh. Really laugh for the first time in months. The camera felt heavy in my hands, its buttons unfamiliar. I hadn't touched it since the day he died, though I'd kept it close, like some kind of talisman. Turning it on, I scrolled through the photos he'd taken. A leaf suspended mid-fall, sunlight cutting through city smog, the shadow of a bird on a brick wall. He saw the world differently, like every moment mattered, even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones. I raised the camera and snapped a photo of the bottle against the backdrop of the golden sky. It wasn't a great shot. He would have laughed at how lopsided it was, but it felt like a start. Like I was borrowing his eyes for a little while, trying to see the world the way he did. As the sun dipped lower, the colors deepening to fiery orange and dusky pink, I pulled out a notebook and started to write. Not just about the trip, but about him. The way he used to hum off-key when he thought no one was listening. How he always ordered dessert, even when he was too full to finish it. The time he convinced me to dye my hair blue for Halloween, and we ended up laughing so hard in the bathroom mirror that neither of us could breathe. By the time I looked up, the stars were out and the bottle was empty. I packed up the camera and notebook, leaving the plastic cup by the tree as a strange sort of offering. I didn't know if it mattered, if anyone or anything was listening, but it felt right to leave something behind. The rest of the trip unfolded like a dream, hazy and vivid all at once. I wandered through medieval streets, their cobblestones uneven beneath my feet. I ate food he would have loved, steak fries drowning in mayonnaise, chocolate so rich it made my teeth ache. And every night, I wrote to him, filling page after page with memories, questions, apologies. One night in Ghent, I stumbled upon a street musician playing a violin. The melody was haunting, tugging at something I couldn't name. I sat on the curb, the beer in my hand forgotten, and let the music carry me somewhere else. Somewhere he might be. On my last day, I returned to the Abbey. The same monk greeted me, his expression as unreadable as before. But this time, I asked him something I hadn't dared to before. "Do you ever feel them?" I asked. "The ones you've lost?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured me a small glass of the beer I'd come so far to drink and handed it to me. "We don't feel their absence," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "We feel their presence, even when it hurts." The flight home felt different, lighter somehow. I opened the notebook and flipped through the pages, rereading what I'd written. It was messy, uneven, raw, but it was mine, his, ours. At home, I framed one of the photos I'd taken, the lopsided bottle against the golden sky, and placed it on the mantel next to the notebook and his camera. A shrine of sorts. A reminder. The money was gone, every last cent, but it didn't matter. What mattered was what I'd found on those winding roads, in those quiet abbeys, in the golden light of an autumn evening. The thread that still tied me to him. I never stopped writing to him. Some nights, when the world feels heavy, I pull out the notebook and add a new page. "Hey kid," I write. "Guess what I saw today?" And somewhere I like to think he's listening, laughing, watching the world through my borrowed eye. It started with a laugh. The kind that sneaks out when you're trying to be polite, but something just feels absurd. Alex had declined dinner again. Not unusual at this point, but what got me was the way he refused. My husband had grilled steaks that evening, the scent of charred meat wafting through the house, and I'd gone all out with sides. Roasted potatoes, green beans, fresh bread. When I called everyone to the table, Alex was already sitting in the living room, pretending to scroll through his phone. "Dinner's ready," I said brightly, more of a cue than an invitation. My daughter jumped up to pull him toward the table, but Alex waved her off with a casual, "I'm good." "You're good," I repeated, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. My daughter glared at me, her silent warning to back off. But come on, who passes up a steak dinner with all the trimmings like it's a casual decision? The laugh bubbled out before I could stop it. "Mom!" My daughter's cheeks flushed red, embarrassment and anger twisting her face. Alex, for his part, didn't look mad. He looked like he wanted to evaporate on the spot. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just about not being hungry. There was something bigger here. Later, after Alex had slinked out early again, my daughter marched into the kitchen like a storm cloud. "Do you always have to make everything so awkward?" she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "Me? I'm not the one who's awkward at every meal," I replied, then immediately regretted the jab. She crossed her arms, her anger shifting into something more fragile. "He doesn't eat in front of people, okay? He just can't. It's a phobia. A phobia." The word hit like a speed bump, jolting me out of my irritation. Why didn't he just say that? "Because it's embarrassing," she shot back. "He doesn't want people judging him." I wanted to argue that disappearing without a word or sitting at the table like a haunted mannequin wasn't exactly a judgment-free approach. But I bit my tongue. Instead, I tried a different angle. "Look, I get that it's hard for him, but it's hard for us too. Meals are supposed to be a time when we all come together, talk, connect. It's uncomfortable when someone's just there but not part of it." Her eyes narrowed. "So, what? You just don't want him here at all?" "No," I said carefully. "I think maybe he shouldn't come over at meal times. It seems like it's hard for him. And honestly, it's hard for us too." "You'd never say that if he had a physical disability," she said, her voice trembling. I flinched. Was I being unfair? The question gnawed at me all night. The next day, I decided to try a different approach. I called Alex. It took a few tries before he picked up, his voice cautious, like he thought I might yell at him. "Hey, Alex." I started, keeping my tone light. "Can we talk for a minute?" Sure," he said, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't blame him. "I wanted to say I'm sorry if I've made you feel out of place," I said. "But I also want to understand. Eating together is a big deal in our family, and I've noticed it seems really hard for you. Can you help me understand why?" There was a long pause. Then, softly, he said, I don't like eating in front of people. It's hard to explain. I feel like everyone's watching me, judging me, even if they're not." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That sounds tough, I said. I didn't mean to make things harder for you, but maybe we can figure out a way to make it work. Would it help if you came over after dinner instead? I guess, he said, though he didn't sound thrilled. When I hung up, I felt conflicted. I wanted to be understanding, but I also wanted to preserve the sanctity of our meals, that sacred time when the table became a shared space for stories and laughter and connection. Was it so wrong to want that? When I told my daughter about the call, she stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You called him? She asked, incredulous. I wanted to make sure he felt heard, I said. But I also told him that meals might not be the best time for him to visit. Her face softened, but only slightly. He's trying, you know. It's just really hard for him. I know, I said, and I meant it, but some part of me also wondered if trying was enough, or if this was one of those situations where two people's needs just didn't fit together. Either way, the next time we set the table, it felt a little lighter without the weight of Alex's silent presence hanging over us. I wasn't sure if that made me a better parent or just a more selfish one. Maybe both. 3 months ago, my brother Leo asked me for a favor that, in his words, only I could help him with. He was applying to some fancy tech job, the kind of job where people wear sneakers with suits and say things like disrupting the industry. As part of the final interview process, he had to present a project that showcased his technical skills. And here's the thing. Leo's smart, sure, but he's also notoriously lazy when it comes to actually following through on anything. So, when he called me up, I wasn't surprised to hear that he'd procrastinated. The presentation was due in a week, and he hadn't even started. You're the creative one, he said, as if that was a compliment and not a setup. You're good at making things look impressive. Can you help me whip something up? By help? Of course, he meant do most of it while he sat there. That's how things usually went between us. Growing up, I was the problem solver, the kid who stayed up late finishing group projects while he charmed his way through life. Leo had a knack for making people want to help him. It wasn't malicious. He genuinely believed everyone wanted to pitch in as much as he did. But it was exhausting. This time, though, I hesitated. For once, I didn't want to rescue him. I just started a new freelance gig and was already drowning in deadlines. My evenings were the only time I had to decompress, and the thought of spending them on Leo's project filled me with dread. Still, a tiny part of me wavered. He was my brother, after all. Didn't that mean I owed him at least a little? Can't you just throw something together? He asked, sensing my hesitation. You're so good at this stuff. It'll take you, what, an hour? 2 tops. I knew it wouldn't. I knew it would turn into late nights and frantic phone calls and endless revisions because Leo would keep changing his mind about what he wanted. But instead of explaining that, I just said, I don't think I can help this time, Leo. I've got a lot on my plate. There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine his face on the other end of the line, wide-eyed, caught between confusion and betrayal. You're serious? He said. You're really not going to help me? I'm serious, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You've got to be kidding me, he said, and I could hear the disbelief morphing into anger. You know how important this is for me. I'm not asking for a kidney here, just a little help. I get that, I said, but I can't this time. I am sorry. Wow, he said, and then he hung up. For the next week, I try not to think about it. But every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened. The messages trickled in, first from Leo, then from our mom, then from our dad. Mom was the first to weigh in. He just needs a little support, she said, her tone dripping with disappointment. Dad was subtler, asking if I'd at least given Leo some guidance on how to get started. It felt like they were all circling, trying to guilt me into caving. But I didn't. For once, I held firm. The day of his presentation came and went. I didn't hear from Leo, and I didn't reach out. I told myself it was his problem, not mine. That night, I went out with some friends, ordered an overpriced cocktail, and tried to convince myself that I felt good about my decision. Then the next day my mom called. You know Leo didn't get the job, right? She said, her voice tight with accusation. He bombed the presentation. He said he didn't even finish it. You could have helped him. It wouldn't have been that hard. I bit back the retort bubbling in my throat and said something vague about how Leo needed to learn to handle things on his own. Mom didn't say much after that, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. A few days later, Leo called me. His voice was flat. No anger, no guilt, just a strange, hollow tone I didn't recognize. "I hope you're happy," he said. "Because I'm sure as hell not." I wanted to say something, to explain, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. I knew anything I said would sound like an excuse. After a beat, he hung up. Here's the thing, I don't think I was wrong. Leo is an adult. He's capable of solving his own problems. But at the same time, I can't shake this gnawing feeling that I let him down. Not just as a helper, but as a sibling. Should I have sacrificed a little more of my time to help him succeed? Or was I right to set a boundary, even if it cost me? AITA? To be fair, it was also about the air conditioning. Or maybe it was just about us. Neither of us willing to give an inch. But the window was the battlefield. It was a sweltering Saturday afternoon. One of those days where the heat seems to settle into your bones and stay there. The AC in our tiny apartment was struggling like an asthmatic hamster, wheezing out lukewarm air that only seemed to mock us. I was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning uselessly above me, when Claire walked into the living room and yanked open the window. Immediately, I felt the sticky summer air ooze in, heavier than before. "What are you doing?" I groaned, sitting up. She didn't look at me, just stood there in her tank top and shorts, leaning on the window frame like she was auditioning for a heatwave-themed music video. "It's hotter inside than it is out there," she said, like this was an indisputable fact. "No, it's not," I said. "It just feels that way because you're standing in front of the oven you call a window." She turned her head, giving me that look she saves for when she thinks I'm being particularly stupid. "Feel free to check," she said, stepping aside and waving me toward the inferno. I sighed because I knew it was a trap, but I walked over anyway, stuck my arm out the window, and immediately pulled it back. "Yeah, no. It's like standing next to the sun." "You're such a baby," she said, laughing. "I'm not a baby," I protested, even though I kind of was. "I just don't understand your weird obsession with fresh air. This isn't fresh. It's stale, hot soup." She rolled her eyes and walked to the kitchen, leaving the window open. The argument could have ended there. A small, silent compromise where I closed it after she left the room and pretended it had never been open. But no, I was too petty for that. I shut it firmly. She heard it from the kitchen. I knew she did, because I heard the unmistakable clang of a spoon dropped into a bowl. Seconds later, she was back in the living room, standing in front of me with a spoon dripping with peanut butter. "Did you just close the window?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Because it's hot. I was letting the air circulate," she said, her tone sharp. "Well, it was circulating right into my face, and now it's not," I replied. She narrowed her eyes, then walked over and opened it again. "There! You stay here." She stared back, daring me, and I closed it. It was childish, I know, but at that moment, I wasn't about to lose a war over air circulation. "Are you serious?" she snapped, slamming the spoon onto the counter. "Yes, Claire, I am dead serious about this very important issue," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Her eyes flared, and she stormed back to the window, throwing it open again. "You're ridiculous." "No, you're ridiculous," I shot back, closing it immediately. The next 30 seconds were like a terrible comedy sketch. She opened it. I closed it. She opened it faster. I slammed it shut. At one point, the cat darted out of the room like, "Nope, I'm not dying for this." "Stop being a child," she finally yelled, her hand gripping the window frame like she was about to rip it out of the wall. "Then stop opening it," I yelled back. "I'm hot. What do you want me to do, melt into the couch? You're not the only one who lives here. And you're not the only one who's miserable." The words echoed in the room, sharp and louder than either of us intended. We froze, both of us breathing hard. I hadn't realized how worked up I'd gotten until I felt my heart thumping in my chest like it wanted out of the conversation too. Claire crossed her arms, her voice quieter, but no less cutting. "You always do this. It's like you'd rather win some stupid argument than just listen to me." "Oh, please," I said, rolling my eyes. "You're the one making this into a whole thing. It's a window, Claire. A window. And it's never just a window with you," she said, her face reddening. "It's the trash, or the dishwasher, or whose turn it is to buy groceries. It's like you're keeping score in a game, I didn't even sign up to play. That's not true, I said, but my voice faltered because maybe it was. She stepped back, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. Do you know how exhausting it is? Feeling like I'm always wrong, even about little things? That's not fair, I said, my own voice rising again. I'm not trying to make you feel wrong. I'm just, what? Right all the time? No, I'm just trying to keep things normal. I snapped. I'm the one who keeps this place running, Claire. I'm the one who... Don't you dare, she interrupted, her voice shaking now. Don't stand there and act like you're carrying the weight of this apartment alone. I work too. I clean. I cook. I do everything I can to make this place feel like a home, and all you ever do is nitpick and argue. The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I wanted to lash back, to say something equally sharp and hurtful. Instead, I turned toward the window, shoved it open, and stepped back. There, I said, throwing up my hands. Happy. Claire's mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then she just shook her head, grabbed her spoon off the counter, and walked out of the room. I stood there for a long time, staring at the open window and the faint shimmer of heat rising from the street below. Outside, someone was mowing their lawn, and the faint scent of grass mixed with the sticky humidity in the air. It wasn't about the window. I knew that. It wasn't even about the heat. Now I'm sitting here alone on the couch, the air conditioning groaning faintly in the background, the window still wide open. Claire hasn't come back into the room. I don't even know if she will. And I'm stuck here wondering if I'm the asshole for closing the window or for not hearing her when she was trying to say something bigger. The evening began with the distinct hum of a household trying to stay afloat. Jackets flung over chairs, a faint smell of lavender cleaning spray masking something burned in the kitchen, and two boys zipping through the living room like caffeinated squirrels. Their mother stood at the door, jangling her keys and listing instructions as if reading them from a fading teleprompter. Bedtime at 8. Pizza money on the counter. Don't let them tackle each other too hard. She paused mid-sentence, glanced at the boys doing somersaults off the couch, sighed, and gave me a thin, grateful smile before disappearing into the night. I'd been babysitting since I was 15, and there was a rhythm to it, a cadence of chaos and calm. Feed them, tire them out, make them feel like the small victories, winning a card game, beating me at Mario Kart, were monumental triumphs. Tonight felt no different. The boys were charmingly loud, conspiratorial in their sibling banter, and utterly thrilled when the pizza delivery guy rang the doorbell like a herald of joy. We set up dinner in the kitchen, the cardboard box sprawling across the table like an oversized treasure chest. The boys grabbed their slices, chattering between bites about the pizza wars at school, who liked plain cheese, who dared to order anchovies. Do you think aliens eat pizza? The younger one asked, his face a Picasso of marinara and mozzarella. Obviously, his brother said. They probably put weird stuff on it, though. Like moon rocks. Maybe black holes. I added, and they laughed, their voices overlapping like a song you didn't realize you knew the words to. Eventually, I grabbed a couple of slices for myself, a breadstick on the side. It felt natural, like eating with family you'd stumbled into by accident. The pizza was good, crispy crust, not too greasy, the kind that lingers on your fingers even after a napkin's done its best. I didn't overthink it. Why would I? Babysitting was as much about connection as it was about duty. Sitting down with them, sharing a meal, made the evening smoother, warmer, less transactional. After dinner, the boys drifted into their wind-down phase. Homework, then a chaotic bedtime routine that involved brushing their teeth to the beat of a made-up superhero-themed song. By the time I tucked them in, the house felt calm for the first time all night. Their parents returned just after 10, the faint buzz of wine and dim restaurant lighting still clinging to them. How was everything? The mom asked, kicking off her heels and scanning the room as if searching for signs of an impending report card. Great, I said. The boys loved the pizza. You had some? She asked, her voice dipping into a tone I hadn't heard before, sharp and tight. Caught off guard, I nodded. Just a couple of slices. There's still some left in the fridge. Her face hardened, a subtle shift that felt like stepping onto ice you didn't realize was thin. We didn't expect you to eat their dinner. Her husband, still wrestling his coat off, stopped and looked at her, then at me. I opened my mouth to respond, but words tangled in my throat. The silence stretched like elastic, pulling tighter and tighter until it snapped. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure why. "I thought." "It's fine," she interrupted, her tone making it clear it wasn't. I left shortly after, my usual exit. "Thanks, have a good night." Feeling hollow as the door clicked shut behind me. The walk to my car was surreal, the chill of the evening air biting harder than usual. I felt like I'd been accused of a crime I didn't understand. Had I stolen something? Broken a rule? It was just pizza, wasn't it? On the drive home, my thoughts spiraled. I replayed the moment over and over, dissecting it like a scientist with a new species of guilt. I'd always eaten when babysitting. Families had offered it, sometimes insisted on it. One mom even left me handwritten notes. "Eat the cookies I baked. Don't leave me tempted." So, why did this feel like trespassing? The next morning, I couldn't shake it. I texted a group chat of other babysitters I'd grown close to over the years, explaining what had happened. Their responses came back swift and incredulous. "Wait, what?" One wrote, "Are they serious? You're watching their kids, not running a monastery." Another chimed in, "Every family I've worked for has practically begged me to eat. They're lucky you didn't charge them for bringing your own food." And yet, beneath the validation, the situation gnawed at me. It wasn't the food, it was the implication, the unspoken line they'd drawn, marking me as someone who didn't belong at their table. A week later, they texted again. "Are you available Friday?" I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. The babysitter in me, the one who prided herself on being reliable and professional, wanted to say yes. But the person in me, the one who'd walked out of their house feeling small and unworthy of 2 slices of pizza, said no. "Sorry, I'm not available," I replied, and that was that. I've thought about that night a lot since. The way some people draw invisible lines around what they see as theirs. How generosity, or the lack of it, reveals the architecture of a person's heart. And how, sometimes, the most important thing you can do is walk away, even if it means giving up something small like a paycheck, or a couple of slices of really good pizza. It started as a conspiracy of love and ended in sheer absurdity. This past Sunday, Mia and I found ourselves victims of our own good intentions, tangled in a web of mismatched surprises. Neither of us intended for it to turn into a comedy of errors. But isn't that how these things go? I'd been plotting for weeks. It was our friendship-versary, a milestone we'd been jokingly commemorating for years since we first bonded over a disastrously burnt lasagna at a college potluck. Back then, Mia had laughed, grabbed a bottle of wine, and said, "Let's just drink and eat chips. If we can survive this mess, we can survive anything." And so far, we had. This year, I wanted to make it special. I reserved a table at La Fermata, a chic restaurant known for its candlelit ambience and decadent desserts. I'd even sweet-talked the staff into serving an off-menu tiramisu, a nod to our shared love of Italian food and our ongoing joke about never learning how to make it. The plan was foolproof, or so I thought. The morning of Mia called. "Hey," she said, her voice unnaturally chipper. "You free tonight?" I paused, already suspicious. Mia's tone when she was hiding something was unmistakable, a little too breezy, like a magician trying to distract you from the fact that your wallet was about to vanish. "I might be," I replied cautiously. "Why?" "No reason," she said too quickly. "Just don't make plans, okay?" "Mia." My voice carried the warning of someone who knew better but couldn't stop the train wreck. "Just trust me. And, dress warm." She hung up before I could interrogate her further. Dress warm. That was the first clue that my perfectly curated evening was about to be hijacked. I tried to piece it together. A bonfire? A winter hike? Whatever it was. It clearly didn't involve the little black dress I'd planned to wear or the bottle of wine I'd carefully selected to bring to La Fermata. My stomach churned with equal parts curiosity and dread. By 6 p.m., Mia was at my door, beaming like a kid on Christmas morning. "Ready?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "For what?" I pressed, but she just handed me a travel mug of hot cider and a scarf. "You'll see," she said cryptically. She drove us out of the city, through winding back roads that eventually led to a park I didn't recognize. The sun was setting, and the air smelled like pine and frost. We pulled into a clearing, where a patch of snow-dusted grass was lit with dozens of twinkling fairy lights. A picnic blanket was spread out, laden with thermoses, snacks, and what looked suspiciously like a Polaroid camera. "Mia," I said, my voice caught between awe and panic. "What is this?" "Tata," she said, gesturing dramatically. "It's our friendship photo shoot and stargazing night. I remembered you said we didn't have any good pictures together. So, voila!" She held up the camera. "We can capture our vibe and immortalize it in terrible lighting forever." It was impossibly sweet, but as I stared at the elaborate setup, my heart sank. I thought of La Fermata, the cozy table waiting for us, the tiramisu I'd so meticulously arranged. There was no way to do both. And yet, how could I tell her that? "This is amazing," I said, my voice a little too high-pitched. "You really outdid yourself, right?" she said, clearly pleased. "I even brought your favorite, dark chocolate-covered almonds." She held up the bag like a prize. "I know this isn't as fancy as you're used to, but I figured we could be like chill and spontaneous for once." Fancy? Spontaneous? My plans were dying a slow, tragic death in the back of my mind. I hesitated, torn between pride in my own surprise and the genuine effort Mia had put into hers. "Funny you should mention plans," I said finally, trying to keep my tone light. "Because I actually had something in mind for tonight, too." Mia blinked. "Wait, what?" "I booked us dinner at La Fermata," I admitted, wincing. "It's this whole thing. I even got them to make tiramisu. For us. Like friendship tiramisu." Her mouth fell open slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might laugh. But then her gaze darted to the picnic setup, and her face fell. "Oh," she said softly. "Wow, that's really thoughtful." The awkward silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, caught between her fairy lights and my crumbling expectations, both of us trying to figure out how to salvage the night without derailing the other's plans. "I didn't mean to," I trailed off, unsure of how to finish. "I just wanted to make it special." "Me too," she said, fiddling with the camera strap. "I mean, I figured you'd appreciate something like low-key and personal. You're always talking about how much you hate making big plans." "I do," I said quickly. "But this isn't about me hating plans. It's about us. Like celebrating." She smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, what do we do? You want me to pack this up? We can still make it to your fancy dinner. And abandon your picnic?" "No way," I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Okay, what if we try both? Like, we do the photos and stargazing first, then hit the restaurant for dessert." Mia's eyebrows shot up. "You think we can pull that off?" "No idea," I admitted, laughing. "But it's worth a shot, right?" The next few hours were a whirlwind. We drank cider, fumbled with the Polaroid camera, and tried to name constellations that were probably just airplanes. By the time we made it to La Fermata, cheeks flushed from the cold, the staff had graciously held our table. The tiramisu was still waiting, complete with the story card I'd written. Mia read it aloud, laughing at my terrible handwriting. It wasn't the night I'd planned. It wasn't the night she'd planned either. But somehow, it felt like the perfect blend of both. As we walked home, arm in arm, I thought maybe the best surprises aren't about the details. They're about the heart behind them. Still, part of me wonders, AITA for turning our surprises into a chaotic mashup? Or was this how it was meant to be all along?